Celebrity. Yeah, Jack's a bit of a celebrity. He was named an unsung hero in 2021 during the pandemic. Yeah, I found that out when I Googled his name. There was a bit of a radio interview about him. And he's speaking today with us on a very important topic: mental distress, recognition and response, client support. Very important, especially now with all that's going on in the world and what our clients and our students are dealing with. So it's my pleasure to welcome you, Jack. And I just want to ask you, are you okay if we record the session?
Yes, absolutely. That's more than fine.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Jack. And so you will speak until around 11:15, and then we'll take a 15-minute break, and then we'll go again. You'll speak again from 11:30 to 12:30.
That should be great.
Okay, thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Lori, for the kind introduction. Thank you for the kind words. I did not include the unsung hero bit in my bio. That's very good. That's a little embarrassing that you found, but a very kind recognition from colleagues in the community and just part of a large organization that helps. And again, I'm excited to get to be here, to be able to meet with all of you on a Friday. What a better way to spend a Friday than in a virtual mental health training. And I can see the excitement in the room now that we're excited to be here, excited to share this content. This is a course I designed many years ago, adapted and brought it here to Peterborough to focus on recognizing distress in another. How do we recognize distress in another? How do I work to direct that person towards appropriate care or resource? De-escalate, redirect, point towards appropriate care. So I can start again just by reintroducing myself. Like I was so kindly introduced, my name is Jack, and I do work with the Canadian Mental Health Association as the manager of community engagement education. And it's just a fancy way of saying that what I do is teach about mental health and mental illness, more or less, just teach people how to stay well. I can tell you I teach all those different courses that Lori had mentioned. I work with the Peterborough Petes as their mental health coach. So I work alongside and provide support to the organization. I work with the league as an advisor. And I spent many years prior to doing all of this working in forensic case management, primarily working in a maximum security provincial detention center, assisting with inmates upon release from the institution. When they got released, helping them find places to live, family doctor, job psychiatrist, whatever they identified as like a need or a goal. So I did that for a long time and then decided I should just get myself a nice cushy desk job where I can work from a basement, which is what I'm doing here today. So I'm glad again I get to be here with each of you and share some of this. So, you know who I am, but why am I here this morning? Well, I'm really hopeful we can learn more about mental health and mental illness so as to better understand a person's needs and what they're experiencing, to practice effective, clear communication skills in order to better connect. I'm really hopeful we can answer a lot of your questions surrounding mental illness. And again, in all seriousness, I can respect, being in a training, being in virtual sessions, maybe it's not your favorite way to spend a Friday. So if something I say doesn't make sense, you have a thought or an idea, you want to challenge me on something, by all means, raise your hand, unmute yourself, fire away. I'll do my very best to answer your question when you have it. Last but not least, though, we're not going to be learning the skills necessary today to provide formal diagnosis. So, an hour or two with me, it's not going to make us all skilled clinicians. It's not why I do these talks. I don't do them so we can go and diagnose somebody, but rather so we can better recognize when somebody might be experiencing mental distress and when they'd really benefit from connection towards professional care. So as Lori identified, the session is really broken down into two halves. In our first half, our first 45, 60 minutes, we'll be talking about mental health and mental illness, looking at the difference between mental health and mental illness and some specific mental illnesses and how they might present. We're going to focus really on 4 key illnesses here this morning: depression, type 1 bipolar disorder, generalized anxiety, and schizophrenia. What they are, how they might impact a person, really simple ways to stay well. We'll take that good 10, 15-minute break, stretch your legs, refill your coffees. We'll come back, and then we'll talk about communication strategies. So if I saw an individual that I was supporting in the classroom in a community setting that was experiencing what I believe to be some form of distress, what things could I do to de-escalate and redirect towards appropriate care or resource? Now, I've mentioned again, I've run this course in a lot of different settings for a lot of different organizations. And I find sometimes, particularly in sort of a public sector setting, there's sort of an initial pushback with a course like this. And people will come and they'll say to me, Jack, man, I got enough to do in my day-to-day job. I don't got the time to be the therapist, the counselor, the clinician for all the people I oversee, for the people I'm supporting, the people in my classroom. The idea of this training, the idea of this session isn't that leaving here, you have to be a therapist for everybody that you interact with in your day-to-day lives. I really hope that this course is just helping to give you two things: awareness and confidence. You're more aware to when somebody might be experiencing mental distress. You're more confident directing that person towards appropriate care or resource. If you've got those two things in the next 2 hours, I would call this a resounding success. So with that, we'll jump in and we'll start off with a topic that I always seem to start sessions off with, and it's the topic of stigma. And I can tell you the etymology of the word stigma, the history of the word. It's actually a Greek word. So in ancient Greece, when someone committed a crime or a criminal offense, they were actually branded with like a tattoo or a marking on their arm. And they referred to that marking as stigma. It was meant to let everybody know that this was a bad person. This person should be ashamed or embarrassed. They're not as smart as we are, not as talented as we are. They're to be ostracized. They're to be kept away. In fact, if you're caught socializing with a person who has stigma on their arm, well, then you're just as bad as they are. Well, when we talk about stigma, but in the context of mental illness, we as a society, we can have all kinds of stigmatizing ideas about what it means to live with a mental illness. We could think things like, well, people with a mental illness are dangerous, that mental illness only affects the impoverished, the poor, that people living with a mental illness are somehow responsible for it, or even that people are defined by their mental illness. Have we heard stuff like that before? Probably. We can tell you again, they're categorically untrue. We talk about people with a mental illness are dangerous. We actually know statistically, you're much more likely to be the victim of a crime living with a mental illness and actually commit one yourself. Mental illness only affecting the impoverished. Again, I'm sure we know about social determinants of health. We know income plays a role in a person's health and wellness. But the idea that mental illness only impacts the poor, just simply put, is not true. In fact, something like type 1 bipolar disorder we'll talk about today, it is twice as prevalent in high-income nations versus low-income nations. I always try to teach that mental illness doesn't care how much money you've got in your pocket. And that last statement there, people are defined by their mental illness. We have a lot of vernacular words and language we use every single day that can have a really stigmatizing effect, a really labeling effect on somebody living with a mental illness. So how about this? Maybe by a show of hands, you can nod your head if you've heard something like this before. If I know a person lives with an illness like schizophrenia, have I heard it said about that person? Oh yeah, Joe's a schizophrenic. Have I heard that term before? Probably. Well, what did I just do? Somebody unmute and tell me, what did I just do to Joe in that one simple 3-word sentence? Joe is schizophrenic. What did I just do? Someone tell me.
You've defined Joe as being simply what he has and what he suffers from.
Absolutely. I have defined Joe by his illness. I have labeled Joe as an illness. You know, if Joe, heaven forbid, lived with an illness like cancer, I would never say, oh yeah, Joe is cancer, Joe the cancer guy, because I see past a physical illness and I see a person. What I try to teach is that same mindset about mental illness, because I can tell you all firsthand, working with people living with illnesses like schizophrenia, there were so many people that didn't want to reach out, that didn't want to get help, that didn't want to say what was going on with them because they didn't want to get labeled as the something, the schizophrenic guy. So what do? Well, we can challenge or change the words we use, saying something as simple as Joe's living with schizophrenia. Joe has schizophrenia, he's doing fine. That little change in our language gives a lot of respect back to that person who's living with that illness. All right. So maybe now we'll jump into some facts and stats, because that's why you've all been signed up. We are all super excited for this session to see all the cold, hard statistics on mental illness. Maybe not. We'll show them anyway. We're going to take a look anyway. We know at least 1 in 5 people in Canada will experience mental illness in a given year, about 20% of the population. We know 75% of mental illnesses will appear before the age of 24. So in fact, if we look at a really high-risk age range for the onset of mental illness, we're looking at about 15 to 25. So if I put a whole bunch of different illnesses on this screen and their average age of onset, we would see very quickly 15 to 25 being a very high-risk age range for the onset of illness. Why do we think that is? Somebody unmute and tell me, why is 15 to 25 a high-risk age range for the onset of mental illness?
Because they're already going through a change in their bodies. So as they change, as your testosterone, your estrogen, or whatever your hormones are doing, you probably make yourself more vulnerable to almost anything else that
Oh my goodness, yes. So we're talking about biological changes and hormone changes and growth and development and brain growth and development. My brain's going to keep growing and developing until I'm sometimes 25, even as late as 30 years old. Those major biological changes, absolutely. What about psychosocial changes? Someone else give me some more too.
It's a big time for changes in general. Socially, finishing high school and start potentially leaving your parents' home is a big challenge.
What a huge one right there. Absolutely. You talk about finishing high school, and we think about high school in and of itself and the social pressures and peer pressures and expectations. And now I've finished high school. I'm heading off to post-secondary into the workforce, and I've got to move it on my own, take care of my own bills, cook and clean, take care of responsibilities. The world wants different things of me at 23 than it did at 12, didn't it? And those pressures it puts on a person's mental health and wellness. I'll
you're
tell you
figuring
all,
out who you are.
figuring out who I am, trying to identify who I am, understand, or figure out who I am just to me, let alone who I'm going to present to the world. All those pressures, all those expectations, 15 to 25, an exceptionally high risk age range. And I always say, that said, the average age of onset for something like an anxiety disorder in Canada, it's around 11 years old, so 5th, 6th grade. Early onset for anxiety is more like 4 or 5 years old, an illness we see impacting those younger and younger. We also know that almost 1 in 10 Canadians, about 7 to 8%, will experience depression at some point in their life. And of those, 50% will experience that depression more than once. And that last stat there, that's a stat I try to put into every single talk I do, because to me, it screams the impact that stigma can have on keeping people from reaching out. We know that almost 1/2, or 49% of those who feel that they have suffered from depression or anxiety have never gone to see a doctor about this problem. Essentially, 50% of people who've said, yes, I have this problem, have never reached out for help or support. Stigma and language, the way I talk about others, the way I treat others, can have a direct impact on their health and wellness. Any questions about any of those before we keep sliding along?
Thank you, Jack. It's Cynthia Hux, and
Hey.
Jack, we do use the word Joe is diabetic, and either Joe is iron deficient, or Joe has iron deficiency, or has heart problems, or is a cardiac client. So in medical terms, we can alternate between is and has. So I still think that there is a genuine fear in the population when we say Joe is schizophrenic or Joe has schizophrenia. I think we're stigmatizing partially because of our fear of what happens when I meet Joe, if I may add that.
Yeah, I think that's absolute, that projection of fear. I think that's a real thing. And that fear often comes, in my experience, from either uncertainty, I don't know what to expect or what I'm going to see, or just a lack of information. I don't know much about it. And I've only learned what I've learned for television or media, or through stories I've heard, or through news stories. And that sort of limited exposure to certain things can certainly impact fear or sort of uncertainty again. And it's actually interesting you mentioned that. I remember being at a talk with the Diabetes Association, and they talked about that idea of labeling that child as a diabetic kid. Like, oh, that's the diabetic kid, and how that could be sort of that label that maybe they carry with them now all through public school, through high school, and moving that transition in language. The little things we can do is, it's a child that lives with diabetes, and there's so much more. They're artistic and they're talented and they're smart, they're creative and they're funny. The same thing here. And again, I'm not here to be language police today, to tell people how to talk and how to live their life, but a little reminder that the language we use, and Cynthia's identified it very well, that be mindful ourselves of how we feel, how we project our emotions to others will impact how others access care and support.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Cynthia. Nice to get to meet you in a room here as well.
I feel the same way. Thank you.
Awesome. Any other questions or thoughts? All right. People are ready. They're excited. Let's build on understanding of what mental health is. And, I mentioned off the top, and Lori mentioned all these different courses that I teach, one of them being mental health first aid. Now, mental health first aid, one of the first things I'll do, I'll get a big piece of chart paper, I'll slap it up on the wall, and I'll write down a pretty simple question. I'll write down, what is mental health? And I can tell you this, in 99.9% of scenarios, that group looks back at me and they say, Jack, mental health is not having a mental illness. Well, mental health is so much more than just the absence of an illness. It's how we experience life events, how we cope with stressors, realize our own abilities, work, study, play productively, how we contribute to our communities. The key idea, again, being everybody has mental health. Everybody has mental health, just like everybody has physical health. I can be mentally healthy, just like I can be physically healthy. I can become mentally ill, much the same as I can become physically ill. So imagine mental health as like a spectrum, a continuum that we as individuals will all move fluidly on between being possibly mentally well or even potentially mentally ill. How we move on that continuum, it's dictated by a lot of things. So things like genetics, our life experiences, major events or trauma, our lifestyle, sleep, diet, exercise, socialization, peer interaction. All of these things are dictating how each and every one of us is moving right now on our own independent mental health continuum. So I want you to imagine now any one person's mental health continuum. And imagine you're seeing this person drifting towards becoming unwell. The first thing we're going to see are what we call mental health problems, common struggles and difficulties that affect everybody from time to time. Well, it's on the furthest end of that continuum that we actually see mental illness, that diagnosable condition that usually requires some form of treatment or intervention and response. So I've got a diagram here to help me out. Fancy looking thing, I know. Truth be told, I stole it. I stole it from a psychiatrist. His salary is like 5 times my own. I don't feel that bad about it. So we'll call this here a balance wheel or a balance circle. Now, in a perfect world, I'm going to be in perfect balance right in the center of that circle. Who in here is in perfect balance right now? Use that little raise hand feature if you're in the perfect balance right now in your own circle. No? I see no raised hands, not even on a Friday. I'll tell you what, we got 4 key factors. Essentially, 4 things are going to pull us away from our center and lead us towards becoming unwell. Essentially, 4 things that lead to every and any mental illness. And they're in each corner, right on the side of this chart. Trauma, genetics, personal stress, and workplace stress. Now, when I say things like workplace or school stress, that would encompass the environment of that workplace, the environment of that school life. Much the same, personal or home life stress, the environment of that personal or home life. So now these things here, they're pulling me away from my center, not always equally, not always at the same time. And when they pull me away a little bit, that's when I start to see those mental health problems, those common struggles and difficulties. Well, I see things like low energy. I see worry or fear, distraction or withdrawal, or even high energy. When I cross the threshold from what is that mental health problem to what is a mental illness, the key phrase we need to remember is, again, all on the outside of that circle. Impaired function. Can no longer achieve or complete my activities of daily living, the things I got to do every single day just to get by, just to survive. Because now these symptoms are so present. They're so exacerbated, they're magnified. So you might be thinking, well, what do you mean activities of daily living? What are those things we've all got to do every single day just to get by? We might think to yourself, well, Jack, shoot, I gotta get my butt out of bed in the morning. I gotta get something to eat for breakfast, have a shower, brush my teeth, get the kids off to school, or shovel the driveway on a day like yesterday, go grocery shopping, enjoy social or leisure activities, all these things. What we call ADLs, activities of daily living. And when these symptoms are so present that they impair the functioning of those ADLs, well, that's when I cross that line from problem to illness. And all of a sudden, something like low energy may become depression. Worry or fear change to anxiety or phobia, distraction or withdrawal, even change to psychosis, or high energy to mania. It seems almost too simple, but I want to assure you it really, truly is. If these things in any way impede or impair a person from being able to live to their maximum or full potential, we want to start to explore ways to better or improve that person's mental health. Any questions about that?
I have a question.
Certainly.
So can people have psychosis that's not an impaired function? So like moderate levels of psychosis?
It's actually a really interesting question. So when we look at illnesses that include psychosis, let's look at one like schizophrenia, for instance. And people often think of schizophrenia, which we'll get to later, as almost like sometimes a light switch of sort of it's there, it's not. what we know about psychosis is a progressive degenerative illness. And essentially, the more impairing those symptoms become, the sort of more disruptive and the more close we are to an illness like schizophrenia. Schizophrenia, we've seen highest level impairment 6+ months with an impairment in a variety of areas. When we look at the spectrum itself, we could start with things like a delusional disorder, where the impairment is very mild. So with a delusional disorder, you're seeing symptoms present for like 1 to 3 months, and the sort of impairment centers around the delusion itself. So an example to give, but let's imagine I had a person who experienced psychosis that was, the government's bugging my phone. People are listening to me and they're following me around. In other areas of their life, if we're not talking about phones or the government, functionality is going to be pretty much normal. They're going to be able to carry on. But when we start to drift towards conversations about the government, about using their phone or using a cell phone, we start to see the emotional distress. We start to see the impairment functionality. I don't use the phone and I don't go out and I don't. So we could start to see the impairment sort of permeate into that sort of focused area. And as it goes untreated, it'll expand to other areas of their life. Even further back to less impairing, having odd or eccentric beliefs doesn't necessarily mean it's psychosis. It becomes psychosis when it's impairing. So a roundabout way to say, if we're seeing psychosis, it may not be high level impairing at first, leave it untreated, it'll become worse and worse and worse, like anywhere in medicine. Even this untreated, over time, more often than not, it worsens. Could a person have odd, eclectic, or eccentric beliefs with really low level impairment? For sure. We probably wouldn't classify it as psychosis until it became really impairing.
I see. So for
Does that
example,
make sense?
a predisposition to conspiracy theories, but not in a particularly disruptive way, would be an example of that.
Perfect example. And I get that question a lot about conspiracy theories. Similarly, think about things like, and again, I don't want to mess with anybody's beliefs or be disparaging any beliefs by any means. You think about things like ghosts, for instance. I'm not here to say ghosts are real or not real, but there are some people that will say, I've seen ghosts, or I've spoken with ghosts, or I've talked with ancestors that have passed. For me to come in and say, oh, they're experiencing psychosis, when there's really low level impairment, that might be pretty ignorant to kind of see of someone else's beliefs. So again, you can see they might hold a more eclectic belief, a more eccentric belief. There's no impairment as a result of carrying that belief. Now, if that belief about ghosts was, well, they're in my home and I can't sleep at night and they're following me around and they're going to try to get me and they're after me, you could start to see how the impairment is ramping up and becoming more disruptive. Again, does that make sense? We talk about that scale of impairment.
Yes, that does make sense.
Awesome. And you could, like you said, conspiracy theories is another one people talk about. Ghosts, what do you call it? Vision, like having visions or seeing. You could see again how it could become more impairing if it disrupts that functionality. But again, if it's just an eccentric or eclectic belief and functionality is normal, who am I to say that it needs to change at all or the person needs to seek mental health care? Any other questions or thoughts? That's a really good one. All right. We will spend our second half talking about if I had a person that was experiencing disruptive psychosis. So like psychosis that was causing distress and causing the person experiencing distressing emotion, what can we do to direct towards care? We will talk about that in a bit. And we'll go into much more detail about schizophrenia, which would be instances where we've seen psychosis present for a prolonged period of time, and there is very much present disruption. All right. So let's go through each of these maybe one at a time first. And we'll start with depression. And I've got this little diagram here to help me. You can tell as we go through, I like visual cues, visual aids to help me teach as we go through. Not as snazzy as the prior speaker though, but again, old school PowerPoint. That's what I was raised on. We've got our sort of happy and sad range of emotions right down the middle there. We've got our normal range. Now, before I get too far into this, I can tell you all that our brain, it regulates our mood very much the same way that a thermostat controls the temperature in a room. So here's a really hard question again for a Friday morning. When a room gets really, really cold, what's the thermostat supposed to do in that really cold room? Somebody unmute and tell me.
Turn on.
What's the turn on? Kick on the furnace, bring the temperature up to where it's supposed to be. What about in a really, really hot room? What's it do in a really, really hot room?
Should kick off.
It should kick off, or at least notify the air conditioner to kick on, bring the temperature back down to where it's supposed to be. Our brain is going to regulate our mood very much the same way. When something happens in my life, makes me feel low or down or sad, my brain is going to click on like a thermostat and with time, bring my mood back up to where it needs to be. Much the same, when something in my life happens is exciting, makes me feel good or happy or energized, my brain again will click on like that thermostat and with time, bring my mood back down to where it needs to be. So I've got this happy and sad range of emotions, and right down the middle there, I've got our normal range. Now, the first question is usually, Jack, what in the world is a normal range of emotions? How can you tell me that people have normal? So I can tell you that we all have what we call a normal, but think of it like an average or a baseline range of emotions. So for instance, I could imagine in this room, there are some friends, peers, or colleagues, people that know each other pretty well or moderately well, probably have a decent understanding of where each other's sort of average range of emotions is on a day-to-day basis. You're probably all a little bit different, some of it higher, some of it lower, but we all have that average, that baseline, or that quote unquote, that normal. So now what's something that could happen to any one of us that would suck, really bring our mood down? Somebody unmute and tell me.
The loss of an animal.
A death or a loss. So let's imagine I've got this person going along in their normal range of emotion. And at this point of drop off right there, they've experienced that death or that loss of that pet. Now, if I could imagine myself in that scenario, I could imagine how my mood starts to go down. And I go down to that low, down, or sad area. And when I'm down there, do I care at that point in time what's for dinner that night? What's coming up on the weekend? Whether or not my outfit is new or nice? Or I just want to be left alone. I just lost someone, just lost something important, just go away. But in time, that thermostat in my brain, it's going to click on. And with time, it's going to bring that mood back up to where it needs to be. Natural and normal. In fact, I can guarantee every single person in this room, myself included, has experienced that in some form or fashion. Now, I sincerely hope you haven't had a serious loss before, because truthfully, that's terrible. But something in your life didn't go the way you planned, didn't go the way you'd hoped. Your mood went down as a result. But in time, the thermostat in your brain clicked on, and with time, brought your mood back up where it needed to be. Well, who in this room has ever lived in a house, an apartment, a place with a busted thermostat? Ever lived in a place where the thermostat didn't work properly? Any hands up there if you've been in a place where the thermostat didn't work properly? I see a couple going up. I saw Jeremy right there put a real honest hand up. Jeremy, would you be so kind as to unmute and tell me what happens in that cold home when that thermostat doesn't work properly?
Actually, it was the cold spell that just happened like about 2 weeks ago. And
Oh,
really, the thermos, anyway, it was just irregular. We had it turned way up, and the house was not heating up.
It was not heating up. And I'm sorry that it's a recent one. I'm not hoping to turn off a Band-Aid too rough for you, Jeremy.
It's fixed really easily, ultimately, but
That's good. Well, that's good news, because when that wasn't fixed, when it wasn't working like you've identified, that house got cold. That house stayed cold. What I want you to imagine is that someone living with depression, as if that internal thermostat in their limbic system, like, it's not working properly anymore. So that when their mood goes down, it's almost like an invisible barrier comes in and it pins that mood down. It holds it down. So that feeling I had when I first found out I had that loss, well, now that feeling stays. It persists. It continues. When it continues for at least 2 weeks, that is what we call clinical depression. And you can start to imagine how all those things I mentioned earlier, like getting a good night's sleep, like going to work or caring for a family or shoveling the driveway, how much harder all those things can become when I'm stuck down there. And that is the plain and simple difference between being low and down and sad, a mental health problem we will all experience at some point in our lives, and mental illness. Those two simple features. Symptoms are prolonging. Symptoms are impairing. The mood, the feeling, the symptoms last too long, and they keep that person from being able to do what they need to do in their day-to-day life. Again, that's when that sadness becomes depression. That stress becomes generalized anxiety. Just like we identified with the previous questions, this odd, eccentric, or strange beliefs might become psychosis when symptoms prolong, when symptoms impair. Any questions about that?
Hello. Is there such a thing as a functioning depressive?
Absolutely there is. And I think that's such an interesting question. I think that was Patricia. Was that your question?
Yes.
Absolutely, Patricia. So always think again. So I'll tell you this, historically, when we looked at mental illnesses and our historic sort of diagnostic criteria, it was very siloed, almost an idea of it. It's there, it's not. And I think what we've recognized in years as research has evolved and we learn more about the brain and how illness impacts an individual is that all illness really does sit on a scale based on level of impairment. So I've drawn on the diagram here sort of that low disruptive mood, and it's really in a really low impairing place. Could you imagine more mild to moderate sort of decrease from normal or average range of emotion? And yeah, I'm able to go to work, and yeah, I'm able to socialize with others, and yeah, I'm doing the things, but it's just hard and it is difficult and it's disruptive. Could you see that low mood more mildly or moderately disrupt functionality? For sure. Could that still qualify as a depressive episode? Absolutely. Don't always think it has to be its highest level or most extreme level of disruption or impairment to be something we want to work through to better or improve. How about this? We talk about something like persistent depressive disorder. We used to refer to it historically as dysthymia. And that's when we see any deflation from an sort of average range of emotion or normal range for 24 months plus. And if we see any level of sort of spike, return to baseline, it's for no more than 30 days before we're back down on that low. And I had someone describe it to me once, and I hope I've got no West Coast people on the call. I don't want to offend anybody. It was almost like living in Vancouver. And we talk about that idea that, you know what, you wake up and it's raining. And at lunch, it's raining. And you go home after work, it's raining. And the next day, it's raining. And 2 days later, it's still raining. And after a while, rain just becomes the constant. It's just raining. And you can imagine again for a mood or a low mood, it just kind of becomes the constant. Yeah, I'm able to function, but not well, not to my full ability. So yes, you could see it on that range based on impairment for sure. Does that answer your question?
Yes, yes, thank you.
Awesome, really good question. Other questions or thoughts too?
I have a quick question about depression, in connection to grief.
Oh yeah.
Is there a distinction between the two really, or can we just use the two words interchangeably?
It's an interesting question, and I'll tell you this. So, and I will assume where the questions come from, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, because it's a really good question. So sometimes people say, Jack, 2 weeks seems like an odd time frame, especially if we've had a very legitimate loss, like a grief, and someone's grieving. And I will tell you historically, so our DSM-4, which was written in the early 90s, 1992, and it had a very clear criteria for depression, and it had specific criteria for grief or loss. And I'll tell you, in our newest DSM, which was written in May of 2013, that criteria was removed. And the idea was simple. Even if we've had low or disruptive mood for a very legitimate reason, there are still things I would want to do to work to better or improve that mood. And I'll always say, again, if I've had a grief or a loss, a very serious loss, it's very likely I could experience a depressive episode as a result. That's not bad or wrong. In fact, that might even be more likely. But regardless of why my mood is low, if it is low, if it is prolonged, if it is disruptive, there are things I can do to work to better or improve that mood. And it doesn't always have to be intensive psychotherapy or a dedicated medication regime. Exercise and sleep and diet and socialization, cognitive behavioral therapy in a self-led manner. There are all kinds of things we can do. So I'll always say, don't necessarily think of that line being tied to why, only that it sort of is. And if we see prolongment and impairment, we might want to encourage that person to really focus on the things they can do to help to better or improve their mental health. Does that make sense?
It does, yes. Thank you.
Awesome. Really good questions, everybody. Any other questions, thoughts? All right.
Jeff,
Oh, yes. Sorry, go ahead.
again, the element of personal stress, we experience that when our thoughts are activated in terms of making a decision, and that's good for us.
Sure.
You know, that degree of, it's just like, that's an exercise when we're making a decision, and it applies with exercising our body. When we exercise and weight lift, we cause stress to our body, physical stress. So, what do you say about that? The importance of personal stress to keep our minds active, that exercise and other things that keep our minds active has an element of personal stress with it.
I'll tell you this, you're going to love the section when I get to things like generalized anxiety. So I'm going to pause you and I'm going to talk about in a couple slides the difference between good naturally to eustress, the things I need for functionality, for safety, for survival, versus when it becomes more disruptive. So is it okay if I tuck that question in my back pocket and come back to it?
Thank you. Yes.
We will come back to that. Awesome. All right. We'll keep moving along because you guys have got some good ones coming up. So again, really quickly, that mood persists for at least 2 weeks without lifting, and that feeling starts to deepen over time. Worked with a lot of inmates coming out of jail, living with depression, that would say the exact same thing. Jack, I feel like I'm sinking. I feel like I'm on an elevator that's going down. I can't make it stop. I can't step off. This idea like their feeling was worsening or deepening. It starts to interfere and prevent us from conducting everyday life. It can actually manifest itself with physical aches and pains. Body can start to physically tell me when experiencing psychological or emotional pain. So let's build on this. And let's talk a bit about bipolar disorder. I'm going to focus today specifically on type 1 bipolar disorder. And I think now we've got a pretty sound understanding of what can happen if I get stuck feeling low and down and sad. What about getting stuck feeling really good? Everyone think that sounds pretty good, right? Sounds good. Getting stuck feeling good all the time. Well, what's one great thing? What's one fantastic, best thing in the world could happen to any one of us, be so incredible, so unbelievable, so amazing? Someone unmute and tell me, what's that one thing we're all hoping to have happen to us one day? Someone unmute and tell me. What do we all want to win?
Win the lottery.
Well, we want to win the lottery. Absolutely. Who was that helped me out there that gave me that answer?
Courtney?
Courtney, was it Courtney? Courtney, thank you so much for helping me. Courtney, guess what? I'm giving you permission. Courtney, you have just won the lottery. Somebody else unmute and tell me, how much money did Courtney just win? Someone tell me.
$5 million.
Courtney, what a day. What a Friday. What a day to go to an online seminar, because Courtney, you have just won $5 million. Courtney, how do you feel right now?
Amazing.
Amazing. Incredible.
World.
Yeah, this is going to be a good day. I feel on top of the world. Not a problem I can put in front of you right now you can't solve. Imagine feeling that great, that height of emotion for 7 full days. Now, who thinks that sounds pretty good? Feel like for 7 days straight, I just won the lottery. People are waiting for a catch here. When someone experiences that height of emotion for that amount of time, that's what we might describe as mania. And in combination with experiencing these low depressive states, this on your screen would be what we call type 1 bipolar disorder. Now, I want to clarify. It's not that during this elevated state, that person just thinks, oh, I got a bunch of money now, but I feel that good. I feel that excited and that euphoric. And with that feel-good feeling, can come some really serious symptoms. So the thoughts in my head start to become pressured and rapid. I start going from idea to idea to idea. And as a result, my speech picks up. So now I'm talking fast. I'm thinking fast. I don't feel like I need to eat. Don't feel like I need to sleep. I start to lose sight of long-term consequence, start to engage in high risk or impulsive behavior, high risk drug use, sexual activity, things would otherwise never engage in. Again, I remember one particular gentleman experiencing mania, living with this illness. He decided on this one particular Saturday that he was going to go to a car auction. And when he came home from that car auction, well, he hadn't purchased one vehicle. He had purchased 14 vehicles, feeling so good, so euphoric, not thinking through that long-term consequence, not thinking through, I can't afford this. My wife is going to kill me. But thinking instead, I'll start my own car dealership. I'll sell my house, I'll live in the cars, give the cars to all my friends, I'll stay with them, not truly thinking through that long-term consequence, that high risk or impulsive behavior. And again, it doesn't always have to follow the pattern on your screen here of low, then high, low, then high. So about 60% of people will experience a steep drop right from period of mania straight into depressive state. So about 40% can experience periods of stabilization. Maybe it's multiple periods of back to low, back to base, low, back to base, followed by one episode of mania. Again, I've just drawn it like this, sort of for our own learning. The other thing I will always mention about this illness, someone living with type 1 bipolar disorder is 15 times more likely to die by suicide than the general population. This illness can come with it a very high risk for suicide. Any questions about this one? All right. Next on our list. Generalized anxiety. So the first bullet here, it's a bit wordy. It's the second one I want us to remember. So fear is the emotional response to real or perceived imminent threat. Anxiety is an anticipation of a future threat. So anxiety is my brain telling me danger is imminent. We need a response. Something bad's going to happen. I need to deal with it. So I've got another diagram here. Again, pictures to help me teach. Another diagram to help me out. This on your screens, this is what we call normal signaling. This is representation of all of our brains working properly. So we'll think of an example then. So let's say it's a Sunday night. You're driving home from the lake. Got to be at work first thing Monday morning. Maybe driving a bit faster than you should. Anyone here, any speeders in the room? Anyone speed? No? Of course not. Not one single person in the whole room. We're all driving nice, safe, reasonable, 81 kilometers per hour, not a click faster. And as we're driving along that nice, safe, reasonable speed, a deer, an animal, something darts out in front of our car. I think we've all been there before. You're driving along, something darts in front of your vehicle. Well, in this scenario, we have a danger or a stimuli, that animal in front of my vehicle. One of my internal signals will recognize it. So I see it, I hear it, I taste, touch, or smell it. In this case, I can see it. I see that animal in front of my car. So my brain, it says danger. It tells me something's wrong. We need a response. And my heart rate picks up, my alertness picks up, my perception and tension all rise. I get that great big rush of adrenaline. And what do we do? Somebody tell me, what do you do in that scenario? Unmute and tell me.
Hit the brakes.
You hit the brakes. You swerve, you stop, you go to your fight or flight response for safety or survival. Just like Cynthia's identified, that natural, that normal, that necessary response. I need this elevated state for safety, for survival. So again, I mentioned off the top, I do what I do now very much in a corporate setting, but I really did cut my teeth doing public ed in high schools with students. I can tell you years ago, I was in a classroom, had a grade 10 student right at the front of the room. And he woke up for about 10 seconds to ask me, is this why when you're scared, you can run faster? I said, yes, this is exactly why when you're scared, you run faster. You see a bear in the woods, your brain says danger, elevated response, run away. He spent the next 15 minutes explaining to me and his classmates why you should never run from bears and other bear safety. Not important for us today, but the idea, again, being we need an elevated response. In all seriousness, I get calls almost daily from different industry or companies saying things like, Jack, man, teach us how to get rid of stress. We don't want to have stress in our company, in our factory. Stress isn't always a bad thing. Again, imagine if I didn't have this stress response in those scenarios. Well, I don't brake quite as quickly. I don't swerve quite as fast. I don't run or fight with that same level of vigor. Stress isn't a bad thing, but it's how we utilize, how we harness that response. Well, let's look now at our same scenario, but for somebody living with an anxiety disorder. So same scenario, same time of day, same stretch of road, same 81 kilometers per hour down the highway. But this time as we're driving along, this time, nothing jumps out in front of my car. Don't see anything, don't hear anything, don't taste, touch, or smell anything. But all of a sudden, my brain fires danger. Something's wrong. We need a response. And again, my heart rate picks up, alertness picks up, perception and tension all rise. I get that same great big rush of adrenaline. But there's nothing there. There's nothing to respond to. That's the idea of generalized anxiety. My brain telling me danger is imminent. We need a response when it's not necessary. Or if there is some form of stimuli present, that response becomes too excessive. It's impairing. I can tell you that feeling is persistent. It's continuous. It's absolutely impairing. I find a lot in my travels that audiences can often be most dismissive of anxiety. An idea like, Jack, man, everybody's got stress. People just got to deal with it. Well, let's imagine you're in your chairs right now. You listen to me yammer on, daydreaming about your lunch, whatever you're doing this weekend. And let's imagine your brain sends the same message to your body as if an animal has just jumped out in front of your oncoming vehicle. Are you going to want to stay on this call and keep listening to me talk? Man, not a chance. You're out of this room before I finish my sentence. I'll do training for high school teachers and tell them the exact same thing. Imagine you have a student in your classroom whose brain is telling you this. How difficult it could be for that student just to stay in their chair, let alone retain whatever information you're trying to provide to them. That persistent, that continuous, that impairing response. Any questions about this?
Will you be talking later about how to help people who are suffering with anxiety?
Absolutely. And how about this? I'll throw it in just in case we don't get details specific to this.
Okay, thanks.
There's a lot of different things that can be really helpful. Going for a walk and exercising and talking to someone I trust. One of the most effective ways to self-regulate our systems, to slow down in this elevated spot right here, because this is essentially what we call primal brain, fight or flight, elevated response. One of the most effective ways to exit primal brain, to slow down that elevated response, is to slow down or regulate our breathing. I can tell you again, really simply, if I can work to slow down a person's breathing, I will slow their heart rate. When their heart rate starts to slow, their mind will start to clear, and in sport and activity and discussion, performance improves. So a really simple technique that we've used, I'm sure you've heard before, box breathing. 4 seconds in, hold 4 seconds, 4 seconds out, hold 4 seconds, repeat. Deep, slow breathing. A very easy example of that at play, that working very well. If you've ever had children, small children, you have had small children, you got a child having a meltdown, I'm talking 12 out of 10 can't get their words out through their tears. What's the number one thing you tell that child to do? Usually, breathe. Just breathe. And as their breathing slows, their system regulates, they can articulate what's actually going on. Trying to engage a person when they're in a really elevated state can be very difficult. Helping them move somewhere quiet, sit down, and regulate their breathing. I just want you to focus on my voice and your breathing. Breathing in for 4 seconds, holding 4 seconds, breathing out for 4 seconds, holding 4 seconds, repeat. Slow everything down. There's a crash course, not to support a person experiencing a panic attack right there. Any other questions or thoughts? Really quickly again, a rapid heartbeat, a headache or dizziness, experiencing a sore stomach or chest pain, excessive worrying, nausea or shortness of breath, or simply put, that general feeling of terror, that general feeling that any minute something bad's going to happen, you need to be ready to deal with. All right, so we'll do one more and then we'll take our scheduled break for 10, 15 minutes or so. And I always like to talk about, before I talk about schizophrenia, I always like to ask, show of hands again, who here thinks, Jack, I've got a super sound understanding of schizophrenia. I know exactly what this illness is. Who's the exact opposite? I know nothing about what this illness is. Who's somewhere in the middle? I know a couple things about what schizophrenia is. That's usually where most will sit. We got a couple there, yeah. That's usually where most of us will sit comfortably. So with schizophrenia, it is a treatable biologic brain disease that affects our thought, mood, perception, and behavior. You'll see stats that tell you it impacts 1 in 100. It's actually a little bit less than that. So about 0.7% of the population will live with schizophrenia. So 7 for every 1,000 is the easiest way I think of it. When we look at schizophrenia, we actually have 2 main types of symptoms, what we call positive symptoms and negative symptoms. Now, don't think, okay, positive, good, negative, bad. Think of them instead like plus and minus. Positive or plus symptoms are things that are added on now the illness is present. Negative or minus symptoms are things taken away from the person now that the illness is present. So illness arrives, positive symptoms come with that illness, negative symptoms. So illness arrives, negative symptoms, these are things that diminish or leave the individual. Plus, minus, added or taken away. The first 2 types of positive symptoms we might see are what we call delusions or hallucinations, psychosis. So who in here can tell me the difference between a delusion and a hallucination? What's a delusion? What's a hallucination? Somebody tell me.
Delusion can be related to knowledge and perception of a situation that we may already have.
Absolutely. And what would you say for hallucination?
Hallucination can be drug induced, and it can be, and most likely is false. It's seeing or perceiving something false.
There you go, Vegas. So you pulled on the sensory bit there. So we can see drug-induced delusions, drug-induced hallucinations. Absolutely, that drug-induced psychosis. We talk about hallucinations. You keyed on it right at the end there when you talk about we talk about senses. So hallucinations are sensory misconceptions. So just like you said, I see something that's not there. I hear something that's not there. Taste, touch, or smell. Anytime a sense is deceived, that would be a hallucination. We often think of visual, but the most common type of hallucination is actually auditory. So something like a command hallucination, hearing a voice or person telling me to go somewhere, to do something, to take action. A delusion is just like you explained. It's a fixed idea or belief, not based in reality, that regardless of any evidence presented to that individual, they hold their belief as real and true. So we have 6 main subtypes of delusion, and most common be what we call a persecutory delusion, the belief that a group of people or individuals are out to get me, they're after me. So I might believe, for instance, experiencing that type of delusion, that Every room I speak in is wired with cameras and microphones, and the government's listening to me to make sure all the information I give my audiences is real and true. Now, many people will look at me and they'll say, Jack, man, why wouldn't you just figure it out? I mean, you could look around your basement. You'd look, there's no cameras and microphones. The government doesn't care what you're saying. They really don't. If you got a 6-foot lizard standing in front of you, you know it's probably not real. Why don't you just figure it out? Psychosis isn't a matter of the person not being smart enough to figure something out. Instead, imagine for this person like they now have two coexisting realities: the reality of the here and now, and the reality of their psychosis, and an inability to distinguish between which is which. Maybe I can explain better with a volunteer. So maybe would I be so, Lori, would you be so kind? Would you be comfortable being a volunteer for me to help me out with this little activity?
Sure.
That's okay. Thank you so much, Lori. I put you on the spot, but I'm glad you're helping me out. So Lori, really easy. You'll know the answer to every single question I ask you. Don't worry. So Lori, could you help me out and let me know, maybe let us all know, what was your very first job?
I worked at a fruit market, a bulk
fruit market.
store, fruit market thing. Yeah.
Very cool. Whereabouts is that, Lori?
Brampton.
In Brampton. So you worked at a fruit market down in Brampton. Do you remember the name of the fruit market of the store? What was it?
Peary's.
Peary's Fruit Market down in Brampton there. And do you remember the names of anybody you worked with or your boss's name, anything like that?
No.
No? Do you remember what your boss is like? Good boss, bad boss, mean, nice?
He was a bad boss. He was
a bad boss.
He was dishonest. Yeah.
Dishonest. You know, I
Mhm.
always say there's two types of bosses you remember: the great ones and the bad ones. So you remember that was not a great boss. A
Mhm.
dishonest fruit vendor. I don't know if I like that at all. So Lori, tell us a day that you remember working at that fruit market, Peary's, I think you called it. You remember working there down in Brampton. That's really memorable to you. A day that was really fun or really hard. Maybe a day that you got away with something you probably shouldn't have. Any days like that you can remember, Lori?
Yeah.
Tell us one.
Okay. So it was a bulk store and a fruit market. So people used to go in the bins and eat, right? Like they would they would eat the almonds and the candies, and the boss was really dishonest, and he used to watch when people were eating like that. And then he would come, so I would be working on the cash register. So if he caught somebody that was kind of eating too much, he would whisper in the cash register's ear and he'd say, add $10 to their bill.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And I thought, oh my gosh, this guy is terrible.
Oh wow. Well,
So
there we go.
I didn't do it. Like I didn't obey him. I just ignored it.
Unbelievable. There you go. It's the things you learn, the more you job, the things you learn. Well, Lori, that is something that I can imagine is pretty memorable to you. You remember that pretty well, pretty clearly.
Mhm.
Well, Lori, what if before we got started here today, what if I pulled you into a breakout room and I told you that none of that's ever happened? You've never lived in this town called Brampton, which we have never heard of, and you're talking about a fruit market and calling yourself Lori. Your name's not Lori. Your name's Jane. And Jane, you've been missing from Minden for about a week now. And I don't know how you got here today, but I'm really glad I found you. People are worried. We got to get you home. If I came in here today and I told you all of that, truthfully, would you believe me?
No.
No, of course you wouldn't. You know what your name is. You know Brampton's a real place. Remember working at that fruit market? You remember that boss that wasn't so honest about the way you sold his fruit? What if some of your colleagues and I, what if we sat you down and we said, Jane, we're worried. This Lori, this fruit market, this trying to take an extra $10 off people, Jane, none of it's real. None of it's ever happened. You've been in Minden your whole life. And again, we don't know how you've made it here today, but we are really glad we found you. People are worried. We're going to get you home. If we came in and told you all of that, would you believe us? Or would you think, okay, I need new friends at work?
Yeah, I wouldn't believe you.
Yeah, of course not. Again, you know your name. You know Brampton's a real place. You remember working at that place. Even if I brought your family in here and your family, we sat you down and we said, Jane, we are worried. This Lori, this Brampton, this owner of a fruit market that wasn't so honest, Jane, none of it is real. None of it has ever happened. You have been in Minden, Ontario your entire life. You were born and raised there. In fact, we don't think you've ever really even left town before. Would you believe them, or would you think, okay, this is a mean practical joke? And now I'm freaking out a little bit.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Again, Lori, is there anything I could say to you today to convince you that your name is Jane? That you've never been to Brampton, it's not a real place, never worked at that fruit market? Is there anything I could say to you to convince you of that? Well, no, because that's your reality. That's what's real to you. And I'll tell you, that's the same amount of conviction that I'm going to have, that somewhere in this room, there's cameras and a microphone and the government's watching me, because that's what's real to me. And instead of bringing this person new evidence, information, trying to convince them differently. So I'll tell you this story. I did a training for a group of firefighters way up north years ago. And my firefighter, who was a volunteer in that example, his first job was at a summer day camp. And he got really angry at me. And he pulls out his phone. And he goes, "No, Jack, I looked the camp up on my phone. I'd prove to you. I'd show you. It's real." And I came back to him and said, "Okay, well, what if you looked for the camp on your phone right now and couldn't find it? Would that make you believe it never existed?" And he said, "No, I think that the website down or my phone's not working." Lori, I'll come back to you. Lori, what if right now on the screen here, I put up with the camera a driver's license, and that driver's license had your picture on it, but the name said Jane Smith, address Minden. What would you tell me about that driver's license?
I would say it's wrong. It's false.
It's false. It's fake.
Yeah.
It's doctored, and you're super weird for having my picture somehow. Okay. What if I put a map of Ontario on the screen here? I shared my screen, a map of Ontario, and said, "Show us where this Brampton is supposed to be." And where Brampton was supposed to be, well, the map I shared said Seattle. What would you tell me about my map?
Your map is wrong.
Map's wrong. Okay, fair enough. Let's go to any store you want, anywhere in town. We'll buy any map you want. And on every single map we purchased, they all said Seattle. What are you telling me then? There's a weird conspiracy happening with Jack and the Mac factory, and they're working together to convince me my name's Jane from Minden. Is there anything I'm going to bring to you to convince you Brampton's not a real place, that your name's Jane? No. Again, because that's your reality. Overlapped realities for this person. Again, the here and now, and that psychosis, and inability to tell which is which. So later on, after our break, we will talk about what I can do to direct that person towards care. But just like Lori's very well helped us identify, maps, IDs, evidence would not be successful. It's that disconnect, that overlap in sort of realities. Round of applause again, Lori. Thank you very much. Can I get a big round of applause for Lori for helping me out as a volunteer? We got it there on screen. I see it on screen happening. Thank you very much. All right. Other symptoms. Again, we talk about disorganized behavior or disturbances in thinking, may experience ambivalence or sensitivity. Negative symptoms. Again, illness arrives. These things lessen or are reduced. So motivation reduces. Overall socialization, person often withdraws or isolates. Speech output will actually diminish or deteriorate as well. Overall functionality deteriorates or diminishes as a result of the illness being present. So I'll tell you this, average age of onset for men is about 18 to 25. For women is about 25 to 30. Early onset for symptomology. So we talked about this again. This isn't just a light switch, doesn't just present, progressive and degenerative. So what we call prodromal symptomology, first onset of psychosis, typically presents between the ages of 14 and 35, more specifically 14 to 18. It is so important that we treat those symptoms of psychosis as soon and as early as possible. Again, early treatment, much greater rates of recovery, just like everywhere in medicine. And frankly, every psychotic episode can do permanent irreparable damage to the brain. Treating as soon as possible will be super important. Any questions about any of this? All right. So I look at my clock right now. I had a little true or false quiz in here, but we don't really need to do it because I'm right on cue for a break. So people good with 10, 15 for a break? Can we do 10? Is 10 okay? Because I have another thing at 12:45 I might deduct to and get prepared for it.
Okay.
Sure.
10's good? 10's good. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate your accommodating. 10 minutes.
Okay.
People back, set, ready to go, excited. People I smell lunch, I'm sure. Lunch is in the kitchen or lunch is in the break room. We're ready for it. So we'll cruise towards it. We're going to focus now our second half on effective communication. So if I recognize what I believe a person is experiencing some form of distress, what can I do to point that person towards appropriate care? Like I tell you, everybody regardless of their age, gender, or background, requires a supportive communication style. It's involved both verbal and nonverbal communication skills to convey things like empathy and respect, positive regard, and confidence in that person's abilities. Our knowledge, beliefs, and attitudes, the experience we've had leading up to that interaction, will impact how we respond to others. And how we respond matters to a long-term working relationship. That one-off interaction will impact that long-term working relationship. So if we were to break down communication, we can see 55% of how we communicate is done via body language, 38% through our tone of voice, and just 7% of how we communicate is done with the actual words we use, less than 10%. And people are sometimes surprised by that. But again, how many in this room have ever gotten a text or an email from somebody and you just have the words in front of you and you read that text or that email and you think, okay, are they trying to be funny or are they a jerk? Because we're missing so much context with a wink, a smile, a roll of the eyes, all that indicate something a little bit different. And again, I even think about how we sort of communicate through this venue, and we think about a virtual training. And you might be able to tell, you might not. When I do sort of presentations live with an audience in a room, I tend to be more animated and I move around a lot. I use gestures and sort of my body language, try to communicate, but I can't do that in this setting. It's much more difficult. You can't see me pacing or fiddling or moving my hands as well. What comes a lot more present is facial expression and tone and cadence and the words that I choose, being mindful the medium that we speak in, the medium we connect through, will impact those numbers dramatically. Talking over the phone, I can't see that person at all. And all of a sudden, their tone of voice, the words they choose, the cadence in which they speak, it becomes much more impactful and important when we're sort of connecting. So be mindful again of the medium, how it'll impact these numbers. Let's talk maybe first about body language. So the following nonverbal behaviors, they generally tend to promote increased trust. They open up communication. So displaying an open posture, especially with our arms, keeping an appropriate distance, making frequent but soft eye contact, appearing calm and relaxed. It's always so important, though, when we think about communication, that we don't take an ethnocentric approach to communication, or the idea that the way things are done in my culture, the way I see things, the way I do things, are the only way that things are done. And it makes me think of that first sub-bullet there, displaying an open posture. And I can tell you for years, for a decade plus, I talked about the idea of not having your arms folded in front of your chest. Because what does that mean for many of us? Well, it means perhaps that we're closed off, disinterested, confrontational. Like I said, taught that forever. I was teaching a session years ago downtown. And when I finished the session, I was approached by a young lady who came to me and said, Jack, actually, in my culture, where I'm from, standing with your arms folded in front of your chest is a sign of respect. You're putting your hands away. You're not fiddling with anything. You're focusing on this person and the interaction. I thought, man, I've totally missed the mark here. And it made me think even of our justice system. What we've seen a lot of times historically, if a person of Indigenous descent was brought from a Canadian criminal judge, a lot of times when the judge was speaking, the individual did not make eye contact with the judge, which was interpreted as being, well, very disrespectful. Maybe how I was raised, what I was taught, when someone of authority speaks to me, I'm supposed to stand up straight, look them in the eye. What we missed was that for this person, in their culture, looking someone of authority direct in the eyes when they were speaking was seen as very disrespectful. And by looking away, they were showing respect in their culture. Again, I can be cognizant how I present, how I connect with the people I communicate with, but I can't just automatically assign value to everybody else's body language, especially without thinking about culture. So body language is a big one. Tone of voice is huge. The way we speak communicates respect or disrespect, understanding or impatience. Tone of voice says a ton. Yeah, I went to that talk with Jack this morning. It was the best talk I ever heard in my entire life. Words are all there, but what are you saying when you say it in that manner? It's sarcastic, disingenuous. Man, that guy sucked. Again, I hope you write that first feedback down. But when you say it in that manner, you're telling someone something very different. The pace of your speech, the volume, is there tone in your voice? Is there emotion in your voice? And again, at this point, I always like to pause and try to talk about classroom versus that day. Because again, classroom, this setting, this stuff, it's pretty simple. And you're probably thinking, Jack, man, I don't yell at anybody. I connect with them, I'm mindful of my body language, my tone and cadence. But what about on that day? You know what I mean when I say that day? That day when you wake up and your alarm didn't go off, so you're an hour late for work. You're trying to get out the door and you're trying to get the kids off to school and they refuse to put shoes on. I won't even tell you why. Just refuse to put shoes on. So you finally get them at the door. You finally get those kids to school. By the time you get them to school, now you're 2 hours late for work. And because you're 2 hours late for work, you missed a staff meeting. And because you missed a staff meeting, somebody signed you up for something. Because as soon as you miss a staff meeting, somebody signs you up for something. So you get to your desk with this new task that needs to be done before lunch, realizing you forgot your lunch. You left it at home with the dog that you did not let out. and that person whose question you've answered 10 times already comes back to your door, they knock on your door, they ask you the exact same question for an 11th time. Is there the potential? Is there the possibility? There might just be a little bit of tone in your response, a little bit of emotion in your voice. I'm not saying that's bad. Heck, I'm not saying that's not human. What I'm saying, I need to be mindful of it. I need to be mindful that today has sucked. But I can't let that translate to communication I'm going to have with that one person, because again, that one-off interaction will impact that long-term working relationship. And I can answer that question the same calm, clear, and direct way I did the first 10 times I asked it. And when I leave my space, I can lay my head down on the table. But being mindful, especially on that day. Active listening. It's essential to any working relationship. And what is active listening? Well, it's paying attention, not showing judgment. It's demonstrating that we're listening, paraphrasing, or mirroring back, actively demonstrating that we're listening. And again, it's all those things I see from good audiences like this all the time. You're actively showing me, you're leaning in, or you're smiling, you're looking at your screens, or you're participating in conversation. If I went into a room and you all sat with your backs to me, I might wonder, are they listening to me? But again, you show a person through body language, through communication, paraphrasing or mirroring back. Sounds to me like you're saying. Or as I hear you say that, it sounds like XYZ. When I paraphrase or mirror back, I'm actively doing two things. One, I'm showing you, I'm demonstrating, I'm hearing what you're saying. And two, I'm usually seeking clarity too, aren't I? Jack, as I hear you say that, it sounds to me like you're really angry. Well, I'm not angry, I'm just confused. Helping to best connect or hear that person. I've got a whole list of listening skills here, and I know everyone here knows how to listen. Here's things to make even stronger, even better. Try to ask fewer questions and instead making statements. Like, that's really helpful to know. I'd like to know more about that. Tuning in, being really present. Now, I always sort of laugh to myself, and I think, man, I was not a real good social worker, because I look at this list and I think I was not good at a lot of these things. And I think about tuning in, and I can vividly recall maybe like a Friday, 4 or 5 o'clock, be in my office, my 4th or 5th appointment of the day. I'd be sitting, and that person be sitting across from me. They're talking, I'm listening. And they're talking and talking. I got my pen and my paper out. I'm taking my notes and I'm listening. But slowly, as that person's talking to me, my mind, it starts to drift towards, man, am I hungry? Like, I'm really hungry. I'm going to get a pizza. I'm going to get a Domino's pizza tonight. The Jays play tonight, sit in the deck and have a drink. And it's going to be sunny tomorrow. Take the boat in the lake or go fishing. Man, I work too hard. I deserve nice things. And then I realize I've been daydreaming for about 4 or 5 minutes. And that person, they're still talking. I have no idea what they just said for the last 5 minutes. I didn't really tune. I wasn't present. I let everything else in my life take over, losing focus in that moment and the interaction. And again, I can absolutely respect if you let every person in your life talk at you as long as they wanted, whenever they wanted. There'd be no time for anything else. But for the time that you can allocate, if it's 30 minutes, if it's 30 seconds, being tuned in and present and engaged in that moment, not worrying about earlier or later, focusing on that moment and that interaction. Other skills as well, remaining calm, validating that person's feelings. A simple reminder I always try to take to myself, whether or not I feel the same way as this person, doesn't change the fact that feeling is still real to them. That little bit of validation or acknowledgement. And it makes me think about COVID and working through COVID. And I can tell you that working through COVID, especially really early in March of 2020, we were sort of on site, at least I was on site most days. And so being on site as a result, right from the hop, it didn't really cause me a lot of anxiety to be in the office space. It was kind of just something that we did. But for other staff we had that were away for prolonged periods of time or were coming back for the first time, being in that same space was really anxiety provoking. Again, same space, same environment, 2 different responses. And sometimes a simple acknowledgement of, hey, you know what, Jack? I don't feel anxious about being here today, but I can absolutely understand why you might. That bit of validation or acknowledgement, taking the time just to validate a person's feelings will make everything else you're trying to do and provide support exponentially more powerful. Taking the time to listen, to validate and acknowledge will make things so much easier as we move forward in supporting another. Other skills as well, not making assumptions, trying to take control, not expressing frustration with that person, even though you might be feeling it. I can tell you one of the best listening skills I can give to everybody on this call is allowing for silence. And I'll tell you truthfully, it is something to this day that I personally am terrible at. I find a lot of times, if I ask a question or make a statement, and a person doesn't respond to me in a period of time that I think is appropriate, and there's that awkward or uncomfortable silence. Everything in my brain, it screams, say something else, clarify what you said, make a joke, fill this awkward silence because I'm super uncomfortable right now. When I do that, I'm actively doing two things. One, I'm taking away time for processing from that individual. And two, I'm taking ownership of that silence. Again, we think about taking away time for processing just because I've determined they've had enough time to think of an answer to my question. When I jump in, I reasonably take away time for them to think of an answer. And secondly, and often more importantly in these scenarios, when I jump in, I take ownership of that silence. It's no longer their responsibility to answer my question, is it? Because I was uncomfortable. I gave answers. I gave solutions. I took ownership of that silence. I took ownership of that problem or the issue. What I try to encourage people is to get comfortable sitting in that discomfort. Allow that person to own that silent air and effectively own that issue. All right, muscle versus massage statements. One of my favorite things to talk about. When we talk about muscle statements, well, that's when we just take control. We define options and we don't ask. We make assumptions. We're coercive. We increase tension. We use power or authority to get what we want in the relationship. With massage statements, again, we're validating and supporting. We're asking without making assumptions. We're giving real choice. We're sharing power where appropriate. Now, without fail, I'll run this session and I'll have someone in the audience yell out to me, hey, Jack, you know what? When I use muscle statements, I get what I want. I get it way faster. I'll say, you know what? Maybe in the short term. But I'll ask those same people, if you have to re-enter conversation or communication with a person you muscled all over previously, is it going to be easier or harder to work together next time? I'll tell you it's going to be that much harder because that wall that you kicked down, they spent the last 2 weeks rebuilding it even stronger, even taller. They're begging you. Try to kick it down again. When I use massage statements, again, I'm validating and supporting. I'm giving choice. I'm sharing power where appropriate. I'll say this now. I'll say it again. I will say it throughout. You will always be significantly more successful working with somebody than you will be working at somebody. Involving a person in building a plan makes it that much more likely they're going to want to do the things in the plan. And you might be thinking, okay, Jack, well and good. I get it. Working collaboratively, that's the best. But there are certain things in the role, certain things in the job, certain things in the classroom that are expected, rules that got to be followed, policies that got to be adhered to, tasks that need to be completed. I don't even care about them. I just know they got to happen. Maybe if there's a destination we have to get to, can we work together in choosing the route? Here's the task that needs to be completed. Here are the 3 ways I could envision us doing it. Is there a way I'm not seeing? What's going to work best for you? Involving a person in building that plan isn't just easier for them. It's significantly easier for you when a person is bought in and invested in a process. So whenever you're trying to work with a person or direct towards care, always doing our best to work collaboratively, to work with. Again, I talk about working at all the time. If I worked at everybody that I came across, if I decided for everybody what would be best for them, I could miss everything about who that person actually is. If every person that called me following a talk or following a session that said, hey, Jack, I'm experiencing low mood or anxiety or depression, if every answer I gave was, well, you know what? CMHA. Here's the phone number. Here's the address. Here's how you get help. Not for profit, no cost, free, 300 plus locations across this country. Here's the number. Good luck. If I worked at everybody and decided for everybody, I might miss the fact that for some, well, they've gone to CMHA before, and it wasn't a good experience. They didn't connect well. It wasn't a good resource for them. It just wasn't the right program. The likelihood they're going to follow through and be successful with my plan is far less than if I worked with. Hey, you know what? Did you know we had a local CMHA in our region? Would you be interested in talking to someone else like a family doctor? Is there a local cultural or community or spiritual group you're more drawn to? What resources are available? Let's work with to decide together. Whenever we're trying to direct towards care, always doing our best. Try to work with. Even if there's a destination, let's choose the route together. All right. So we're going to ramp it up as well. When we talk about supporting a person that might be experiencing psychosis, and Lori was kind enough to help us through that process, what that might be like for a person who could be experiencing psychosis. And we recognize that, the map, the ID, the friends and family, it wasn't successful to convince differently. So what can I do if I believe a person may be experiencing psychosis? The easiest way I can explain this We want to validate emotion, not psychosis, and redirect this person back towards care. The psychosis is not real. It's the emotion that's real. And that's where I want our focus to remain. So remember, listen to a psychiatrist. You may have heard him speak before, Dr. Jim Cullum, brilliant dude, super fun to listen to speak. If you have the chance to hear him, seek him out. And I was listening to him speak, and he was telling a story about a clinician he was supervising whose patient, during their meetings, would see sharks swimming through the floor, swimming through the carpet. So what the clinician thought to do, which maybe isn't what we want to do, was they took out the shark repellent and sprayed the floor for sharks, which is, again, not what we want to do. Again, the psychosis is not real. It's the emotion that's real. So you could go so far as to say, Jack, I believe that you see sharks swimming through the floor. But as I look, I don't see that. But then I want to validate what they're feeling. But it seems to me like you're really scared, really upset or confused. I want to help you with that. Then I want to direct them back towards care. Who can we talk to, or who can we reach out to that can help us with this? Can we talk to someone at the crisis line or someone at the hospital? Who do you trust that could help us with this? Focus on emotion, not psychosis, direct towards care. The last thing I want to do is just say something to someone because it's what I think that they want to hear. Again, let's imagine that I told you all that I see an alien in the corner of the room and he's got a gun and he's going to hurt us and I am freaking out. And someone thinks, okay, just to calm Jack down, just to mellow him out, Jack, don't worry, I see the alien too. He's friendly. Well, what if that person asked us then? What if the person asked us, hey, if you see the alien too, what color is it? It's blue. Well, the alien I see is green. And what's happened with the trust between those two people? It's gone. What's the honest response I can give? Jack, I believe that you see an alien. But as I look, I don't see it. But I can see you're very upset and scared, and I would like to help you. Can we talk to someone at the hospital or at the crisis line? Is there someone else you trust that we can reach out to? Who do you want to talk to that can help us with this? Again, focusing on emotion, not psychosis, back towards care. You might be thinking, okay, Jack, sharks on the floor, aliens in the room. I'll know right away that's psychosis. What about that sort of non-bizarre realm? What about something more like, Jack, there's a white unmarked van been parked in front of my home for the last 4 weeks. And every time I go to the mall, go to school, go to the store, I see that same white unmarked van parked out front, and I'm pretty sure somebody's following me. Now, first of all, could that happen? Is that possible? Well, yeah, it's a possibility. So what's the honest response I could give? Jack, I don't know if someone's following you or not, but I can see that it's causing you a lot of stress and a lot of fear, and I want to help you with that. Can we talk to someone at the police station or someone at the crisis line? Can we talk to someone that can help us with those feelings of stress and distress? Again, emotion, not psychosis, to care. I was teaching a course like this down in Hillier, south of Belleville. I had a person say, no, Jack, what you should do is get a piece of chalk. Tell me to mark the tire with chalk. Then you'll know if it's the same van. So I think you're missing the point of the exercise here. Again, whether or not they're experiencing psychosis at this point in time does not matter. If they're experiencing psychosis and I'm telling them to go mark a tire, well, one, if they're experiencing psychosis, that van may not exist. And two, if they're being followed, I probably don't want them approaching that van. Again, like I said, whether or not it's psychosis at this moment in time does not matter. We're not going to seek help because there's aliens in the room, there's sharks on the floor, they're being followed by a van. We're going to seek help because they are scared, confused, upset, or distressed. The emotion is the catalyst for support, not the psychosis. The emotion, we can both agree, is present. We can both agree is real. We can both agree right now you are scared. You are frustrated or upset. Let the police determine if they're being followed. Let the hospital determine if they're experiencing psychosis. Right now, we're going to focus on the stress that is present and use that emotion as the reason to connect with care or support. Focus on emotion, not psychosis. Direct back towards care. Other little skills and tidbits I'll encourage you in this process. Speaking slowly, calmly, clearly, using very simple, concrete language. I'm not moving fast. I'm not talking fast. Ideally, I've got my hands out of my pockets. Everything is slow, simple, and clear. Really easily to sort of explain. Their person is processing two realities at the same time. They're processing a ton of information. And so trying to reduce the amount of processing they have to do. Simple, slow, clear. not invading personal space or touching without permission, addressing this person by their name if I know it, and if I don't, just ask them how they'd like to be addressed. Always explaining our actions ahead of time. Jack, I'm just going to reach in my pocket and grab a pen. I'm just going to set my phone down on the table. I'm just going to put my keys on the shelf here. Just explaining things ahead of time, making things simple and clear, trying to limit any opportunities for misunderstandings or miscommunication. Reducing stimuli, bright lights, radio, television, noises. Again, one of the recommendations I'll always give. I'm in a waiting area with a radio on. Well, let's turn off the radio. Let's reduce the amount of processing this person's brain has to do. Bright lights or flashing lights, a lot of chaos or noise around. Can I reduce it as best I can? Can I ask people to step back? Can I turn on the radio? Can I reduce the amount of processing their brain has to do? Slow, simple, and clear. Again, assuring them that they're safe and that you're there to help them. Again, not I'm Jack, I'm here to save you from the aliens. I'm Jack and I'm here and I'd like to help. Keeping my distance and keeping something in between the two of us if there is a perceived threat. Again, always remembering that priority number one will always be individual safety. If at any point in time I felt that I was in a situation that was unsafe for me, I would remove myself from that situation and activate an emergency response. Again, I don't care what it is that leads you to believe in a situation's unsafe for you. If you determine it to be unsafe, remove yourself from the situation and activate an emergency response. Always, always, always trust your gut and trust your instincts. Other things as well, not moving too quickly and not invading personal space or touching without permission, like we said, positioning themselves at their level. So again, what can be really helpful to de-escalate a situation? Let's sit down. Let's move somewhere and sit down together. The rule I will usually stand by is staying on the same eye line. So again, if this person is sitting, let's sit together and we'll stay on that same eye line, that power balance and for simplicity and comfort and conversation. If the person doesn't want to sit and they're standing and pacing, I'll stand with them as well to stay on that same eye line. That's the recommendation I'll usually make. Avoiding continuous eye contact or staring through that person, explaining intentions before I act. And if there's anything I can do, complying with a reasonable request is that last one. It might be a strange request, but complying with a request might do a lot to build rapport. Jack, I'll talk to you. You got to take your watch off. Okay, I'll take my watch off. I'll set it here on the table. Maybe it's an unreasonable request. Jack, I'll talk to you. You got to get everybody out of the school. I can't do that. I don't have that authority. Again, if it is a reasonable request, complying can go a long way in building rapport or relationship. I remember doing a training with a group of first responders, and I had a police officer who told a story about a person that they were supporting experiencing psychosis in the community. And when they were having a conversation with that person, they were wearing a body radio. It's around their shoulder, their little radio walkie-talkie. And the person said to the officer, I know what you're doing. You've got the FBI on the other end of that radio, and they're recording my call. They're going to put it on the internet so people can follow me. I believe you think that's what's happening, but that's not what I'm doing. But if it helps you, how about I turn off the radio? Again, an officer that felt safe to do so, a request that could help to build rapport. Again, you determine what's reasonable and not, but complying with a reasonable request can do a lot in building rapport and relationship. Really simply, at its core, focus on emotion, not psychosis, redirect towards care. And I will always say, it is so much easier to teach than to do. It is so much easier for me to sit in this room and say, here's what you do. And I hope it doesn't come off as pretentious, like, hey, Jack came in here and said, now it's super easy, because it may not be. It might be a difficult task to direct that person towards care if they're that unwell. But again, I hope this is another tool in your tool belt that if you are presented with a situation, things that can help to make that conversation easier. Any questions about that section right there?
Hi, Jack.
Hi.
I think I may have missed a slide. Did you address responding to bipolar if you perceive that something like that is happening? Did you address that?
What I sort of, when I talk about it, responding to bipolar, so bipolar disorder you might see present with psychosis, so you could use some of these skills. I think the general communication skills will be good as well. We're going to talk about de-escalation in a little bit as well, which can help if a person is sort of in an elevated state to work to try to de-escalate a situation. But I'll always say, regardless of the symptomology that's presenting, outside of psychosis, which does have very specific direction, if we're using those sort of general communication tactics of sort of the calm, clear, massage statements, collaborative approaches with de-escalating approach, you're going to be successful regardless of the illness that's presenting. I have a specific part to psychosis because it is very unique direction. So that's why there is a specific section to psychosis, because it keys on specifically emotion, not psychosis, because it is more direct. But in general, the general sort of communication strategies we'll use can apply across a variety of illnesses. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I was wondering too about language as it relates to saying to someone who you have, you've been with this person for a while, you've interacted for a while, you've discovered that there really are some really serious highs and some serious lows.
Yeah.
And you're perceiving that this might be the case. Of course, you're not a clinician, so you don't have the skills and knowledge. But then how do you communicate to this person that this might be a good idea to talk with somebody? I cannot find the right words to say.
That's a great
and so I've
one.
not said anything.
But you know what? I think that's a really great question specific to bipolar disorder. And how about this? There's a couple of things I'll clarify. Is one, some of the best individuals to recognize something like a bipolar disorder are friends and family, because who has better understanding of what is a baseline range of emotion than friends and family, and a recognition of when emotion is deviant or deviated from a baseline. Friends and family usually have that best insight to recognize something's not right here. This is abnormal from a baseline behavior. So I'll always give sort of that, I don't know if it's power or sort of like recognition back to a friend and family, that your insight is invaluable. And what I would say is directing a person towards care. Is it okay if I jog backwards in the slides really quick, everybody? If I just slip back to where we had the bipolar disorder. So we talk again, directing a person towards care during those periods of mania can be really very difficult. And again, it can be hard to have strong insight for the individual to recognize that this mood is disruptive. It can be hard to want to access care during periods of mania. I believe is Courtney still on the call? Courtney, are you still there?
Yes.
Courtney's there.
Yep.
Courtney, and I believe it was Courtney that was helping me out that won the lottery. Is that right?
Yep.
You're my lottery winner. Now, Courtney, what if you came to me today? Courtney, you said to me, Jack, I feel the best I've ever felt in my entire life. I'm not tired. I'm not hungry. I've got a million great ideas. I feel like I've got millions of dollars in my pockets. I feel literally bulletproof. And I said back to you, hey, Courtney, don't worry. I've got this treatment regimen. It's going to help you feel normal again. Are you going to be super interested in what I'm selling you?
No, I want to stay here.
Yeah, that's okay, Jack. I'm going to ride this one out. So to answer the original question, it can be really difficult. And thank you, Courtney, for helping me again. It can be really difficult during that period to direct a person towards care. So just trying to be patient, persistent, and encouraging sleep, diet, and sort of direction towards professional support, because this person's not going to want to eat. They're not going to want to sleep. They're going to keep doing things. Let's try to get something to eat. Let's try to get a good night's sleep. Let's talk to someone that you trust, and being patient and persistent along the way. But a recognition, it can be really very hard in that elevated state. So hopefully that's some specific stuff for bipolar that might be a little bit more helpful. Does that help in that sort of conversation?
Sorry, thanks. Yes.
Yes. Okay. Sorry.
I was muted.
It was either they really liked it or they were so mad they left. So either way. Any other questions about this section as well? All right. So let's talk a bit about de-escalation then, which kind of segues us in nicely from the previous question. So our goals of verbal de-escalation are to open up clear lines of communication, to build trust and validate that person's situation, to get them talking about their situation, and gather the necessary information to find good resolution. I will always say verbal de-escalation is a whole lot less of a recipe, more like a flexible set of options. The more tools you have in your tool belt, the more diverse set of problems you can tackle. And I will always say in a tongue-in-cheek manner, if I go and try to fix my toilet with a hammer, I'm the wrong person to ask, but I'm probably doing it wrong. The more tools I've got in my tool belt, the more diverse set of problems I can tackle. And it's all the things we've identified through this session here this morning: body language, massage statements, tone of voice, active listening, all the things that we can apply in a general sense that can be helpful. And these are things that you already know. If you treat every person with the same approach, the exact uniform, same, every student, every person, every peer with the exact same standard approach, you'll be far less successful than if you can meet people where they're at. Being flexible and varied in your approach creates that greatest rate for success. That said, there are some things that are considered generally helpful and generally unhelpful when trying to de-escalate a situation. Things that are sort of generally helpful: speaking in a calm, slow, or clear manner. Always remember, I don't mean loud with loud. If someone is yelling and I come in and yell over top of them, that doesn't encourage a person to speak softer. That encourages a person to speak louder. Energy creates energy. I will be loud with calm, clear, and direct. I will pull that person down to the level I'm hoping to speak on. Reducing background noise and distractions if possible. Again, reducing the amount of processing that person's brain has to do. Allowing that person to vent, again, within reason. After they felt this way before, and if so, what they've done in the past that was helpful. I will always say, Quick wins are usually my favorite because they're often the easiest. Have you felt this way before? What did you do last time? Can we do it again? If it didn't work, what else might you want to try? Involving that person, pulling on successes, working with and collaboratively, and one of the most effective ways to de-escalate a situation is to remove the person from the audience or the audience from the person. Again, I've been training with first responders for 10 years plus, and you'll be blown away. They always sort of laugh. When you're trying to help a person, A, how quickly a crowd of people will form around you, and B, how quickly people in that crowd will share their opinions, regardless how helpful they actually might be. One of the most effective ways to de-escalate the situation is to remove the person from that audience or the audience from that person. You got a student acting out in high school, in class. What's the first thing the teacher did with that student? You to the hallway. I know I spent many mornings there. The idea, again, if you left that student in that room with their peers, what happens to the whole energy of the room? They feed into that acting out behavior, the whole thing boils over. A very easy example. So let's imagine, I can see Jeremy on my screen. Let's imagine Jeremy's just had enough of me. And Jeremy unmutes and he says, Jack, man, this sucks. This is awful. What a waste of time. I'm a busy guy. We're a busy place. We got things to do. What a waste of my time. What garbage this is. Person from audience, Jeremy, I'm really sorry you feel that way. Let's hop to a breakout room and we can talk about what we can do to make the talk better for everybody. Maybe Jeremy's real mad though. Jeremy unmutes and says, Jack, I ain't going anywhere because you suck. And this is awful. What a waste of time. All right, I'd like everybody to hop off the call. Jeremy and I will stay on here and talk about what we can do to make the talk better for everyone. Audience from person, person from audience. Jeremy, thank you for not doing that to me today. But the idea, again, of trying to de-escalate that situation, because what can happen if we try to deal with it with that crowd, all of a sudden someone goes, hey, you know, yeah, Patricia says, Jeremy's right, Jack, you do suck. It went, boo, this is awful. And the whole thing feeds in together. Again, thank you guys for not joining in on me, but trying to de-escalate person from audience or audience from person. Things are generally unhelpful. Using inflammatory language. Hey, you're acting crazy. Interrupting or talking over the person. Saying things like, you need to calm down. Or no, I know exactly how you feel. You need to, is that ever work for anybody, by the way? You need to calm down, because it has the inverse effect, doesn't it? Confronting, arguing, or minimizing what that person's saying. Really simply, addressing the individual collaboratively, asking the person what they think will resolve the problem, looking for alternatives with the individual, empowering them to choose. People thrive on choice. Involving that person in that process, getting an agreement on a course of action isn't just easier for you, it is significantly easier for them, both people working collaboratively together. All right, the last thing I'll touch on, and then I'll open it up for the last 10, 15 minutes for Q&A. Any treatment options or support services, things we can do to be well. So I've got a whole list of things here, things like medication, counseling and therapy, family and peer support, early intervention, employment and academic supports, alternative and holistic supports, lifestyle changes, so sleep, diet, exercise, hobbies for interest, a sense of purpose, all of these things are really important ways for us to better or improve our existing mental health. And I'll tell you, I put this list in this order for a very specific reason. I find a lot of times when people think of mental illness, they think, okay, mental illness, medication. The only way to treat a mental illness is with a dedicated medication regime. We've got research that shows things like cognitive behavioral therapy are just as effective treating depression and anxiety as is medication. I'm going to make a specific statement, so stay with me for it. Medication doesn't always have to be part of everybody's treatment regime. Now, I'll clarify it. People hear me say that and think, oh, cool, Jack said don't take medication. That is not what I'm saying. I am not anti-medication. I think for a lot of people, medication is a really important part of their treatment. I think for other people, it is the most important part of their treatment. But what I am, and I am vehemently, is anti-medication alone. Medication alone will never be the most effective course of treatment for anyone. Even with an illness like, say, schizophrenia, which I can tell you with a strong degree of confidence, a person living with that illness will receive medication as part of their treatment. If we treat a person living with schizophrenia with just medication, their rate of relapse sits around 60 to 80%. Versus if I treat with medication and with formalized support, mental health worker, psychiatric nurse, psychiatrist, counselor, mental health worker, and informal supports, friends, family, social groups, church groups, sleep, diet, exercise, that 60 to 80% chance of relapse, it drops down to 15 to 40% chance of relapse. It's not important we pick one. It's done in combination with the person at the center of their plan. So, with all that information, in about an hour 45. Questions, thoughts, or comments on anything we've touched on here this morning into our afternoon?
I have a question.
Certainly.
If nobody else has a question. You mentioned venting, allow the person to vent, and you touched on the fact that, within reason. So my question is how to handle somebody who's venting too much, because it can be draining for the person who's receiving the venting. So how do you kind of respectfully and compassionately reduce the venting?
So the first thing I'll say is, and it's why I give sort of a vague within reason, because reasonable amount of venting could be unique to each person in this room. We could have people in our lives where, my tolerance to allow someone to sort of unload on me might be a bit higher. Maybe there's a person in my life that, it's a friend, it's a child, it's a partner, spouse, a neighbor. When they want to unload, I can take it and they can vent for 45, 60 minutes at a time. And it's like water off a duck's back. There are some other instances where maybe my tolerance is much lower, where after 5 minutes, oh my gosh, I cannot have it day upon day upon day of this venting. So that within reason is meant for you to be that judgment. When does this sort of venting become disruptive to your own wellness? When does it become disruptive to your ability to sort of function on a day-to-day basis? Is it becoming, now it impairs my mood, or I'm dreading conversation. I'm worried about it before it even takes place. One of my favorite things to remind a person is, hey, you know what? Sometimes the best way I can help you is by bringing you to someone that can. There's limits to what I can do, and I want to help and I want to provide support, but there's realistic limits in what I can offer you and what I'm able to provide you with. But would you be willing to explore with me together what other resources we could build around you to help make sure you can have the most appropriate help possible? So trying to just, again, really set that healthy limit and that boundary. What am I able to do? What am I not able to do? And a reminder that there's limits to what I can do, what I can offer you. And sometimes the best way I can help you is by bringing you to someone that can. Let's figure out together who that someone could be. I see a hand from Lee.
Hi, I actually had that scenario recently, and I actually put out to the person, because it was someone where I had a professional relationship, and I just said, I don't think I really understand the need to vent, and we can set a timer to vent, but I can't continue to do this because we don't have the kind of relationship where I'm comfortable with you venting for me on a regular basis for a long period of time.
Yeah,
And so
and I
we set
think
a
setting limits in your
timer,
wellness.
and then I offered, like you said, to get help. So I also
Perfect.
offered to set the timer so that it was very defined, so that period could happen. And it seemed to work. So I'm happy.
What a
about
strong boundary. Always remember, every behavior serves a purpose. And when that behavior no longer meets the need or meets the purpose, the behavior will change. So person feels like, again, this is not the best place for me to vent or just connect to. They're going to find somewhere where it can be more effective. It can be better supported. And I think you set a really healthy limit and boundary. So good for you. That's awesome. Thank you for reinforcing what I was
I was proud of myself because I wasn't sure how to handle it, to be quite honest. And it was becoming difficult. So thank you for bringing that up. Anyway.
Well, congratulations. Is it Kimberly? Kimberly,
yeah. Hi, everyone. I just wanted to share an observation with you. I'm teaching Link online at Fleming. And so I'm not a stranger to being on the computer with my face exposed like this. And I've taken this session, I've taken the opportunity to turn off the video for this workshop today. And I have found that has been really interesting to be invisible. And part of the reason I've done that is that most of my students will turn off the video. And what I'm thinking about right now is the faceless participant. And they choose to be faceless. And this has been going on months. And, for thinking of this as confidence, language strategy, mental health, I don't know. There's so many opportunities for comment. There is so much more ability to disengage when people can't see you. And you talked about active listening, and you can see now, as soon as my face is on the screen, my hands are here and I'm leaning forward. But when my video is off, I have so much opportunity to disengage and not present myself. And so my students are doing this a lot. And you know, I can suggest it, but I certainly can't strong arm them into doing it. And yeah, that's the reality of my teaching world right now. And I think it's really interesting. And it's interesting for me to shut this off in a few minutes and step back. Right, everybody, right?
I'll tell you this is one that I've actually taken to our senior leadership team. And I've butt heads with some of them on this, because we've had sort of internal discussions about organizational training and cameras and training. And so I have a structured system that I think is maybe different than some. And my thought has always been, and I always have a belief about education, is that comfort facilitates. If you are comfortable where you are learning, you will learn best. And what I will always offer to a group of participants is be comfortable. As comfortable as you can. If that comfort is turning off your camera, turn off your camera and be as engaged as you can. And I always will counter the idea of having my camera on to be engaged with. If that participant is so anxious about their video being on them that they're just looking at themselves, or about how they look or how they're presenting, but they're not listening, I think I've lost them. But again, the counter argument to that is it's really hard to teach a bunch of blank screens. It's really hard to engage the interest, to know if your joke landed, to know if the point you've made across is
you also want them to participate and communicate with each other.
Exactly.
And then you're talking to some words in a box, you know. So
it's been my life for 3 years too.
It is that. Of course, I allow them, you know, and encourage, and whatever happens is mostly fine. But yeah, it is interesting.
It's a debate that we have in our own organization internally, and as my own sort of teaching style, I've always been to that perspective, but I absolutely respect anyone else's teaching style and the benefits that come with it for sure.
Okay, everybody. Well, thanks for listening. And now I'm going to take the opportunity to go back to a blank screen and just enjoy it for the rest of the day, because it certainly takes the pressure off you, right? You're so much not participatory in the same way. So thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate the discussion. Any other questions or thoughts as well? That was awesome.
Jack, it's Cynthia. And hi. I just wanted to mention my gratefulness in the respect that you show to your clients in the examples that you've given to us. And that respect facilitates, doesn't it? That your feelings are worthwhile. And I feel if we're not authoritative in the way that blocks communication, that we need to ask the person. And when the other person, when we're making a request of someone, even if it's as simple as sit down, the term that you hear over and over is, I'm going to get you to sit down. Who wants to be getted? Or get them to sit down, get them, or right from the front of a room of an audience, I'm going to get you to stand. And, you know, you can suddenly feel that you're part of a horde of something. And, you know, and you did not say that. And it shows respect when we say, I'd like to ask you to sit, or would you please sit? We don't have to preface it with what I'm going to do in my next sentence, but I very much appreciated that respect. And I think it's something we all need to keep in mind, that the person's feelings are genuine, and I'm not going to get them to do something. I'm going to ask them, would you like me to help direct you to someone who can do the job better than myself?
I think that's all. Well, thank you so much for your kind words. And I strive for that. And if I have said things that didn't land in other places, I always welcome people to seek me out and help me learn what I can do to make it even better as we go through. So I appreciate that. I'm glad it resonated with some. And I hope to continue to do so as I move through sort of my career and sessions like this. So thank you so much, Cynthia. Any other last questions, thoughts, comments? Well, I know that I will never be able to compete with lunchtime. So I think I will turn it back over to Lori and let the ever-reigning victor of lunch take over.
Okay, wow. I don't know about everyone else. I'm sure everyone agrees. I'm just blown away by your presentation. I'm speechless. It was, I just listened to every word. I hung on every word. You've really modeled what you're teaching, you know, the kindness, compassion, respect, validating approach. Yeah, I thought it was just outstanding. And I'm already seeing in the chat some similar comments. So we can't thank you enough. Thank goodness we recorded it. I can think of a few people in my life I'd like to listen to this. And on that note, I wanted to ask you if you happen to have you know, a pre-recorded. I know you do this same session several times. If you happen to have a pre-recorded session like in studio, or that's, you know,
I have, but typically when it's done at a certain production level, it's been purchased by a company.
I see.
So I'm not saying that it would be not available, but there would need to be sort of sign-offs before it would be made available.
Okay, yeah, it's something, you know, that in a more professional format would be
Not as good as
very-
my basement. So yeah.
Well, no, it's just, you know,
I know exactly what you mean. No, we've
the-
done it before with proper lighting and multiple cameras and lit up well. And yeah, so, but it was purchased by an organization. They use it as a training tool. So
Mhm.
I'm always hesitant to give out something that another vendor has purchased,
Yeah.
just out of courtesy to the vendor. But
Yeah,
if
yeah,
there was
well,
ever sort of interest, I'm always happy to have a conversation, see what I can do to
okay.
make it most effective for the audience.
Yeah, it's just there are times where it was very fast, like we went through things fairly quickly. But yeah, and the other question, are you willing to share your slides?
Of course, yes. Anything I design is public domain. So I will send you a copy of the slide deck and feel free to distribute it to whomever would like.
Okay, fantastic. So with that, I'll just see if there are any final questions from anybody, or if Yvonne would like to say anything before we close.
Maybe just a reminder that I will send out an evaluation form for you to fill out your feedback from both of today's sessions. If you would do that, we will aggregate your feedback and share that with both Jack and Jessica as well. Thank you very much.
Great. Well, thank you everybody for coming, and thank you especially to Jack.
Thank you so much, everybody. Stay safe and healthy. Hope to see you all around sometime real soon.
Okay.
Bye, guys.